Very daring today.
110 more than anybody.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here on such a glorious day. Steve Fancher, your chair, board chair. I'm going to call the May 16th meeting of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board to order. It's 1:01. Let's go ahead and do roll call.
I don't see Nancy Hendrickson, Steve Fancher.
Here.
Eric Mueller.
Here.
Dave Rittman.
Here.
Seth Reeser. I see you, Seth. Ashton Simpson. Lori Stegman. Emerald Bogue said she may be able to join. No, that's a different day. Corky Collier.
I think I'm here.
Rochelle Altman. Not see Rochelle. Do not see Mary Helen Kincaid. Tanny Stephenson.
Here.
Eric Molander.
Here.
Jason Dumont.
Here.
Ed Washington. Bob Salinger. Heather King. Here. We have 9 board members currently present.
Excellent. And before we dive into the business at hand, I want to welcome and introduce Jason Dumont with Mosaic Ecology. Thank you for being here. First board meeting. Turn it over if you'd like to say anything and further introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Jason Dumont. My business is called Mosaic Ecology.
Recording.
Sorry, that's my bad.
Somebody needs to.
I'm sorry, it's me. My apologies, everyone.
And Nancy Hendrickson's joined us.
So we are located in the slough down on 109th Avenue in Portland. My business does natural resources management for mostly public agencies and nonprofits that have forests or wetlands or other land that they need managed. And so we do all variety of things, mostly botanical. So we do a lot of plant work. And I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Are you right there across the street from River City Environmental?
I am across the slough from them. Yep.
Oh, you're on this other side of the slough.
Yeah,
Oh.
we're right. We're kind of, we're at the little Four Corners area. So River City is on one side. There's a porta potty place next to us. There's a street sweeping place next to us. And then
Junkyard right in the area too, isn't there? Am I thinking the right spot?
there's like a towing place
Okay, that's
that
probably-
looks like a
I
junkyard.
just want to make sure.
Hey, Wendy.
Don't they all? Yes. I want to make sure I had the right spot in mind. So yeah, you have to kind of go around to get to, yeah.
Yeah, I'm in a little,
You're tucked away.
I'm at the dead end. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not a dead end, really. It's a lovely place.
Wendy, I have a text from Mary Helen saying she's in the waiting room and it says the host has another meeting in progress. Can you assist?
Email her the correct link.
We'll note, meanwhile, Rochelle Altman has joined and Emerald Bogue. So I think we're up to 12 board members.
Sounds like Mary Helen's trying to figure out how to sign on.
Could you tell her I'm forwarding her a new meeting link? Thank you.
Welcome. Thanks, Jason. Our first order of business is going to be to consider passing the April 2024 meeting minutes. We've got 3 meetings that we had, April 3rd, April 18th, Budget Committee meeting, and April 18th board meeting. And those are all included in your board packet. Entertain a motion to approve or amend. Discussion.
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the April 2024 board meeting minutes and budget committee meeting minutes.
Thank you, Eric. We have a motion on the table to approve said minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
A motion from Eric, a second from Tanny to approve the minutes as stated. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? All right, hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lori Baker for the debt distribution plan presentation. which is included on page 17 of your board packet.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, are you able to see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. So under ORS 550, the board needs to negotiate a debt distribution plan with any legacy district that holds debt. We've discussed in previous meetings that MCDD is the only legacy district that will have debt as of July 1st, 2024. And in fact, we have finished the transaction of paying off the debt for Pen 1. So that's great news. And I wanted to thank Rochelle for all of her support and help in getting that to happen. So I'm very excited. Thank you very much. Today, we're going to review some of the financial information related to MCDD. And at our June 7th meeting, we'll be asking the board to approve moving forward with the debt distribution plan. So let's get started. Let's start at the beginning. So why are we combining the legacy districts? There are many gains for the district. First, we're receiving over $100 million in federal funding of flood safety infrastructure. The urban district is authorized to issue general obligation bonds, and as part of that, the state of Oregon is planning a $45 million investment. This allows us to continue our progress on the levy certification. Finally, we anticipate operating and administrative efficiencies that will allow for improved levels of service and expanded functions. There are two major categories of debt that will be included in the debt distribution plan. First, there are the employee-related liabilities, such as the PERS pension plan, unfunded pension liabilities. The Urban Board has already agreed to take on these liabilities in the transition under the terms of the intergovernmental agreement transferring employees from MCDD to the Urban District. Second, there's the capital debt. And MCDD holds an IFA loan with Multnomah County with a balance of a little under $1 million. This loan funded capital expenditures. MCDD also holds a capital loan with Truist Bank. That loan has a balance of $8 million and is at a very low 2.79% fixed interest rate. Wish we could find those rates today. So as defined in ORS 550, the urban district receives all assets and liabilities from the legacy districts in the transition. MCDD is providing capital assets, restricted cash, and unrestricted or operating cash. Let's take a look at each of these categories of assets that are being transferred. MCDD holds $15 million in net value of capital assets. These include operational equipment such as vehicles, excavators, mowers, the barge, and other equipment that we use to maintain the system district-wide. The district also holds property and facilities such as our administrative office and shop, and all of these assets are essential to the operation and maintenance of the system, and all will transfer on July 1st. MCDD holds about $500,000 in restricted cash. These funds are what remains of the capital borrowing and will be used in fiscal year 2024-2025 to fund capital asset acquisitions that are included in the urban district approved budget. MCDD also holds a projected $8 million in unrestricted cash, and we're anticipating that this balance will likely be more than $8 million by the time we get to the end of the fiscal year. Unlike the funds transferring from SDIC, Pen 1, and Pen 2, MCDD funds will not be designated for use in MCDD boundaries only. This means that this cash will support the operation of the district for the first 6 months of operation, while we're waiting for the collection of the property assessments in December and the first quarter of flood safety intergovernmental fees that will be collected in late September. This cash is what makes the year one cash flow work for the urban district. Without this cash, we'll need to find another source of cash to operate through the summer months. let me go back, got ahead of myself. So I've heard some discussion about a desire to decline acceptance of the MCDD debt or to somehow hold MCDD property owners accountable in some way. The reality is that the MCDD property owners have already paid, as demonstrated by the cash balances held by MCDD. And we would be asking for a duplicate payment for debt service, which is not allowable under the assessment program. So oddly, we hold just about as much cash in MCDD as what we've got in debt balances at this point. So given this, if the debt doesn't transfer, MCDD would need to use their existing cash in June to pay off their outstanding debt balances. This means that the urban district would not take on the debt balance, but the district would also lose that restricted and unrestricted cash. And as we've discussed, that unrestricted cash is essential to our operations for the first 6 months while our sources of revenue are starting up. Let's take a look at the financial impact of that. First, let's look at the cost of the debt, which is the interest to be paid. This capital debt has a fixed interest rate of 2.79%. That sort of rate is not at all achievable in the current market. I'm wondering if I'm behind the slide. I think I am. Okay, so here we go. So here's the capital debt that we've got at 2.79%. As you can see, there are 15 years left of payment on the debt, which accumulates a total interest cost of $1.9 million. It's that 1879 that's showing up in that middle column. If we lose the 8 million plus in operating cash, we'll need to do some short-term borrowing each year to get through the months prior to the assessment collection. This is not unusual for local governments. Many local governments do tax anticipation notes. In past meetings, this has been referenced as the payday loan. As an aside, the board would also lose a lot of flexibility around establishing operating and capital reserves. We would need some extra cash to set up those reserves, and the district wouldn't be in that position without this operating cash that we're seeing at the beginning of operations. So I did a quick look at the cost of short-term borrowing over the same time period that we'll be holding the long-term debt. There's two pieces. First, there's the actual interest cost of the borrowing. I'm using an average rate of 5%, but we know that rate is too low in the current market. So I'm likely understating the cost of interest expense on this borrowing, at least in the early years. I used 5 because I'm certainly hoping that the interest rates go down in the future, but we're looking at probably between 7 and 8% in interest rate for year one on short-term borrowing. The total cost at 5% for the interest expense is $1.7 million. Additionally, because we don't have that cash to invest or hold in our local government investment pool account, we'd be losing interest earnings as well. I'm using an average earnings rate of 4%, which is our current LGIP rate. And over the 15 years horizon, that totals to about $2.7 million in lost earnings. Adding those two items together, the interest expense on the short-term borrowing and the lost interest earnings, the net cost to the district of losing that operating cash transfer from MCDD would be about $4.5 million. Remember that we're looking at interest cost of about $1.9 million on capital debt. And I know this is a pretty simple way to look at this. And obviously we haven't gone through and projected, like if we had savings on the budget, would we be able to rebuild that operating cash balance? So it is just an estimate, but as you can see, like the comparison is pretty dramatic. So this leads to my final slide here. And what we're recommending is that from an overall perspective, we believe that taking on that low interest debt and having the cash balance is really the most beneficial for the district as a whole. So we will be recommending on June 7th that the board consider approving that debt distribution plan. Then MCDD can provide the transfer of the operating cash and we can move forward with the operations of the district. The approved budget for the district does include the assumption of that capital debt. So that's already been considered it doesn't include an assumption for a tax anticipation note. So there would be some impact to the budget if we don't move forward with those cash balances. And right now the district budget is balanced. So with that, I will stop sharing and I can take questions if you have them.
Thank you, Lori. And just a reminder to folks, we're not voting on this today.
Yeah.
This is just informational. Go ahead, Eric.
You're muted, Eric.
I know that. Okay, so Corky and I participated in the Liabilities Committee. We discussed a number of other options for debt distribution. Did you review or consider any of the options that were discussed by the A&L committee?
No, I don't have that information.
No,
Okay.
I was,
The first point to take from this is that MCDD acquired those assets for specific equipment, and that's really the way that they were able to fund it. And Laura, you provided information in the past that has identified the specific assets that were required. So in many ways, because the MCDD landholders have only paid for the prior period's debt and interest payments, they haven't paid for the rest of it yet. And so one of the suggestions coming from our FCS, Group, which were our financial consultants, Gordon Wilson, is he said that it would be possible for us to surcharge the landowners for a brief period of time to take care of any imbalance in their net position. And so what I would want to have is an analysis of what our consultants have previously recommended and see if there's any possible way for us to use that than these other measures. As I understand it, what has occurred to solve the cash crisis that we were in frankly, May of last year, was that you've shifted MCDD's long-term reserves into short-term reserves. And basically that's how we came up with the operating capital to be able to operate. So within this, I'd like you to consider the other options and to be prepared to discuss those options with our group. Thank you.
Certainly.
Nancy?
So on that note, and I'm sort of following the simplified version of things, MCDD equipment and staff served all the districts. So if MCDD bought, I don't know, a big tractor-y thing and is paying it off over with debt, then then everyone in MCDD makes a payment every year, like you were saying, Eric. But the other districts are all paying into that as well, based upon their whatever rate is charged. Like it should be probably an inclusive rate to include all the work. So in that way, I don't think the other districts have paid for all that stuff either. So so just in that example that you gave, Eric, I'm thinking, oh yeah, right. Like things are on credit, like they bought a truck and it's not paid off, but it's not just MCD's truck, it's all the district's truck. And now it's going to be the big district's truck. So I feel a little bit like that's covered, but so that's my contribution to that example.
So let me respond to that. So if you look at what 10-2 has done is we've got a major upgrade to 13th Street, and we're using our reserves to be able to pay for that. So we've already made certain that the wider district, even though it's going to use those assets, isn't burdened by it. And so we're coming in with a clean balance sheet without the debt required. On how you're shaking your head, is there something that I've misunderstood about that?
Actually, I can respond to that, Eric. With the 13th Avenue Pipe project, what we found when we started working on the individual district budgets for 24-25 is that Penn 2 was going to be short on revenue to be able to cover the costs of the rest of the projects that needed to be done for Penn 2 next year. And so we.
Okay, so this is new news to me.
Correct.
All right, so how much were we short?
It was about $500,000. And I think I brought this up a few meetings ago, but there was a shortage and we weren't able to factor in enough of an increase in assessments to be able to make up the difference. So we were looking at needing to make some modifications to the projects if we went forward with individual district budgets.
Okay, so I'll have to review my notes on that because this is the first time that I'm hearing it, number one. And number two, I think that the broader point is that the district had taken every step possible to be able to provide a clean balance sheet and to provide for the acquisitions that were underway. Now, 13th Street isn't going to be part of the GO bond because it was either started too soon or there was some other reason that we weren't financing it through that. But I'll have to go back through and see, number one, what is the total amount that we now project for that? Because a $500,000 shortfall with 1.2 in reserves seems a bit excessive. And I'd really rather have us come back to the principle of what is the net position that we're bringing forward and recognize that if the landholders in one of the groups have not paid off their debt, that we continue to hold them responsible for that and use some mechanism, as FCS was suggesting, that we have an amount charged as to each of them for that period.
Thanks, Eric. I'm going to call on myself. I had my hand up here, and I'll apologize. I'm not a financial professional like some of you on the board. I'm an engineer, so I have a little more simplified view, similar to Nancy. But did I not hear this correctly? That so MCDD does have the option of kind of having this balanced balance sheet when all of this is transferred to the new district, but that's not it's not advantageous to the new district for that to occur, because now we might not have the same level of debt incurred, but we also don't have that cash balance. Again, my simplified way of looking at this, I would much rather have the flexibility in a new board of having that cash balance and the debt at the low interest rate, that at that point, if I chose to, I could pay that off with the cash, but I wouldn't. That would be ridiculous because of that extremely low interest rate and having the flexibility of that much cash. And you saw the numbers as far as having the ability to accrue interest on the balance and what impact that has versus paying off the loan, not incurring interest. I guess I'm looking forward, and maybe that's not exactly how some of you understand that, but I'd lean on Eric. I'd lean on Eric, the two Erics, and maybe Seth as financial professionals to help me understand this better. I saw Mary.
If you're calling on me now, I'll respond. Otherwise, let's take Mary Helen.
Okay, Eric, go ahead and respond really quickly, and then we'll go to Mary Helen.
We do have other options is the short answer to that. And those are the options that we need to take into consideration. I don't think that MCDD would, hold us hostage and say, well, in order for us not to have our landowners charged, we're going to use up all our cash balances. That's not the way either FDIC or Penn 2 is looking at the cash balances that they're going to transfer. But if, you know, it's up to Corky and the other board members of MCDD to make that determination. But they would have to do it before dissolution. So we're looking at this and saying, you know, the best way or a way to do it is to surcharge the MCDD landholders for the debt that they've undertaken, and then bring forward those cash balances unencumbered in just the same way it happens for Penn 1, Penn 2, and SDIC.
Thanks,
I
Eric.
think the one difference, Eric, is that the cash balances for the other three districts are restricted for use in those districts. And MCDD's board thus far has been very open about leaving those funds unrestricted so that we have operating cash. But the landowners would be double charged if you asked MCDD to hand over the cash, but still continue the burden of the debt on the landowners, because the landowners have provided assessment revenues that have built those cash balances that are adequate to cover the entire debt balances at this point. So I'm looking at this as a strictly from a financial perspective, that it's much more, if I were just working with MCDD, my recommendation would be if we're not able to negotiate a debt distribution plan for the sake of the landowners in MCDD, I would recommend that you pay off your debt, because those landowners have already paid once. From an overall financial perspective, it doesn't make sense when you look at the interest rates. So my recommendation is to take both the cash and the debt and move forward so that the district is on solid ground moving forward with a good cash balance. But from simply the perspective of MCDD and the MCDD landowners, we're not in a position to be able to charge them twice for these funds.
Well, so we haven't charged them twice yet, because the only thing that's been paid out of the MCDD accounts has been the principal and interest from prior years, not
Correct,
on
but
any
they
of the
do
existing
have,
accounts.
that's as of today, but what you're suggesting is that I would recharge, I would move the cash, we would have the cash to use, and that would be to no benefit of the landowners, that they would need to pay for the debt again.
Well,
Let's move on.
and
Let's
this
move
is
on.
one of those things that, with the mechanism that you had used to solve a cash crisis, has brought this to the fore. I mean, by shifting it out of long-term into unrestricted, the money that MCDD had been putting away is now unavailable for that. So one of the things that we really need to do is to think about ways in which we can look at options. This option is one that is frankly not fair to the other districts, because what happens when you say, oh, but we've restricted the money, no, it all goes into a cash pool. The check that gets written for projects in Penn 2 comes out of that cash pool, but the balance is still available. So I find that logic just to be unreasonable.
I want to hear from Corky, but Mary Helen has been patient. Go ahead, Mary Helen.
Thank you for calling me patient. I also want to agree with you. I'm not an engineer. My skills stop at Lego blocks. And I've already told you about my accounting skills. And I too am like you, rely on the experts that know finance. But I want to be able to give you a little bit of history that some people may not know. And in Penn 2, for at least the last 3 or 4 years, that piping issue has been on a CIP. We've collected money from landowners. We've told them that we would fix it. And I think that we owe it to the landowners to either explain why it's not been fixed and say, well, we don't have the money, isn't going to sound real well. I'm the one that speaks to neighbors. I'm the one that go to neighborhood groups. I was also involved in conversations about the pump station at PIR. And I think that kind of came up way back in the days when Mark Wigington was on the board and then James Allison became the chair. They recently had an issue with it failing, and it was a really big deal to parks because they were fearful of it flooding the racetrack and interrupting a nationally televised NASCAR race that they might have to cancel because of the water on the track. PIR hired contractors to come in and fix the track so it was raceable. Bill, I didn't see him on the call, but Bill Owen was visited. BES came out, and I don't remember the name. I have been in this meeting, so I don't have time to go back and look at who the contractor was that came. The city stepped in and said, oh, and the explanation given to PIR management was that there was a cash issue, not enough funding available, even though money had been allocated for that. And it was a known issue for the previous 3 or 4 years. And bits and pieces had been replaced on that. I might not be explaining the technical side of that, but it's another issue with people that are outside of this whole realm of engineers, accountants, trying to understand the budget that's on the website, and the comments that I'm hearing are a little bit of distrust of how we, and I include myself in that because I'm part of the board, but how the boards are handling their funds. And so I think that perception needs to be either explained why we haven't done the project and said we didn't have the money when we had that in the budget for the 13th Street and the PIR pump station, the only ones that I've gotten wrangled in with because I'm on a board at PIR. And they've supported a lot of my work. But I think that, to me, it sounds like money got spent. And to me, in the perception of many neighbors, is they were charged for something they haven't gotten and aren't going to get because the city is picking up the tab through, I believe, it was general funds or something. And general funds have not been passed by the city of Portland, so that's not even a positive thing. So I don't know the status, and that's why I was going to ask Bill. Of right now, the pump station seems to be operating okay for the summer, which was most worrisome for all the scheduled events that make the city like $15 million a year. So I just wanted to add that kind of history of the perception that's out there. It's not a technical evaluation. It's not a engineering question, but it's getting the trust of the people that we want to support and continue to support the work that we're saying we're providing flood safety. And sort of the comeback to a lot of that is, no, you're not, because you're taking our money and not doing the job. So
Thanks, Mary Helen.
opinion.
We'll get,
Mary Helen, let me just at least provide a little bit of information. The 13th Avenue Pipe Project is in the consolidated budget for the urban district, and it's all in there. When I was talking about needing to make some adjustments to a budget, it was Penn 2's individual budget before we started moving forward with the consolidated urban district budget. So Penn 2 alone did not have enough funds remaining, plus their estimated assessments for next year, to be able to do all the project work that was included on the CIP. But all of that project work is included in the urban district budget. And we're moving forward with the 13th Avenue Pipe Project. It is underway and it is under contract. So things are moving forward. On the PIR pump station side, we did have an emergency management process that we went through in relation to the pump. And we have plans. If the pump stops working, we do have plans for how to remedy that. And the city has been working hand in hand with us on that project to make sure that we had the funding identified and available to respond if the pump stops working. So we have taken all of the action that we need to make sure that the system is still functional. And all of those costs are included in the consolidated budget that's been approved by the budget committee.
I would just add that the Penn one, the PIR pump station pump is at the shop being repaired, and we have budget allocated in the current fiscal year for those repairs.
Thanks, Jim. I want to hear from Corky.
Sure, and I don't want to speak as MCD rep, I'll just speak as an urban board member who has been around MCD for a minute or two. But I'm not sure of all my facts exactly, so I want to be careful about that. First of all, you're welcome for a good deal on the interest rate. We're happy to pass that along if that helps. Nancy, real quick clarification, and anybody feel free to correct me. I think the better example, the other districts have not helped pay for that equipment that MCD purchased. They did indirectly, but a better way to look at it would be is if MCD was a separate contractor, for example, a separate company that you contracted with at SDIC or PIN2 or whatever, contracted with to do some work. To say that you paid for part of the truck that contractor owns, well, indirectly, yeah, sure, but no, you didn't. It's their truck and it's their debt for that truck. So I think that's probably a better analogy to that, is think of the district as a separate company that has a very tight and good relationship with the other districts. And anybody correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think that's some clarity. At the same time, if I recall correctly, when we took on the debt at MCD, it was not an easy choice. We were not happy with that and concerned about the burden on our ratepayers. But we also were quite, at least some of it, I certainly was aware that this would overlap the merging of the districts. So we knew that this was long-term debt that was overlap the districts. And at least for me, and I can't speak for others without asking them, we kind of assumed that that was likely to be continued as an urban district debt going forward. So I think it kind of fits. At the same time, I agree with Eric. I would feel more comfortable if there was a little bit more clarity on what our options are. I think we're all in agreement that we want the cheapest way forward. That came out wrong. Not always, we want to have the least cost going forward. And if the low interest rate on the MC debt helps us do that, great. If there's another option, and I can imagine other options being better ones, then let's make sure we've done our due diligence on that.
Thanks, Corky. Eric Mueller.
Yes, thank you. I guess as I'm listening to the discussion, I mean, I'm not opposed to hearing whatever this committee has previously identified related to options, but not knowing what those are, what I've heard so far, what staff has proposed, to me makes good sense. MCDD has about $8 million in debt. It's also bringing about $8 million in cash. So to me, MCDD landholders are not at an advantage or at a disadvantage per se. They're, basically washing out. However, those two pieces overlook the fact that we're also getting the $15 million worth of equipment. Now, yes, some of it's been used, so okay, it's depreciated a little bit, but we're getting all of these capital assets that are coming in that debt was used to buy. So I don't see in any way how any of the other three districts are in any way disadvantaged by this approach. I don't think that they're being asked to take on some portion of MCDD's burden. I think if anything, MCDD is the one that's sort of providing the biggest benefit to the consolidated district. And, that's reasonable. They are the largest of it and the operating side and, all of that. And so I look at this and go, I certainly don't object to what staff has proposed. If there's some other option that I'm unaware of that is somehow dramatically better financially, that's fine. But barring that, I'm fine with what's being suggested.
Thanks, Eric. Eric.
Yeah. Okay, that's a little bit better. I think that we're missing a couple of points about what a treasurer does in budgeting for the coming year. And we've tended to focus in on the capital assets without really looking at the working capital. And I think that Penn 2, even though I haven't seen the figures yet, would probably be one of those organizations that would be in a position where we didn't have quite enough working capital available to get through to December. Don't know that for certain, haven't seen what Lori has projected as our ending balances, or what she anticipates for spending in the first part of next year. But we need to look at it not only in terms of the capital, but also the deficit in working capital. And the core problem that Lori identified at least a year ago is that we've got a working capital crisis, and that the way that we've been able to get to this point is MCDD shifted long-term reserves into unrestricted so we could get through this first period. But if we look at the net position of those organizations on a relative size basis, back to Eric Mueller's point, you'd say that SDIC and Penn 2 are frankly generating more for the common good than clearly Penn 1 or even MCDD.
Thanks, Eric. Mary Helen.
Okay, this is a Mary Helen question. And if it's a crazy question, to say it's crazy and I'll be quiet. But is there a way to provide a report of percent? It kind of goes to what Eric just said, but is there a way to provide a report of who pays how much a percent for the lands? Because a lot of MCD land is public lands. And do they pay the same percentage that I do for my piece of property or Penn 2 property owners? So for instance, if we pay, let's just say 30%, or will be charged 30% more, will the Port of Portland or Metro or the county pay that same percentage with the increases because of the assumed debt? Because you were using the term double charged, but what did they pay that made them get double charged, and who charged them in the beginning? I don't know if that makes any sense, but you know, if the a business in MCDD doesn't pay because of the, you know, Measure 5, Measure 50, all of those kinds of things, are the government agencies paying the same percentage that I or my neighbors are paying in support of these programs? And I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the kind of thing that comes up all the time. Why are we paying? Why aren't the people that own the land, the county, the state, etc., paying as much as I am?
Thanks, Mary Helen. Lori, go
And I
ahead.
guess the response to that, Mary Helen, is that was the whole purpose of number one, the additional agreements between the government entities that were experiencing compression. So we've got the stormwater fees from the city of Portland. We've got other agreements as well with the Port of Portland, with Metro, with Multnomah County that are making up for that. So in reality, with that, along with the flood safety benefit fee that the government entities are, at least the city of Portland is running through their general fund for the upcoming year, I would say they're probably paying a bigger percentage for their property than what you are paying for yours.
Okay,
Thanks,
just
Lori.
one follow-up to that. General funds have not been approved in the city budget. And I think Nancy might have a might.
It was
have a different
approved. It's been
but they're-
approved, Mary Helen. The council approved the budget
Today?
yesterday. It's in the paper today.
Okay. I'll have to look for it. Thanks. Sorry.
Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, I think it might be worthwhile, since there's a lot of question about who's paying what and who's paying for the new cost of the district. to come up with something that's a good informational tool for people to use. I recently saw an article that was asking about specifically the Port of Portland's contribution both before and after the new district. So with the questions that Eric and Mary Helen and some of the folks in the public have been asking, it might be worthwhile to show kind of by entity or by district what people were paying under the old system and what people were paying under the new system. And I had raised that question in an email to staff back in December. It didn't seem like it was going to be a big issue, so I didn't pursue it, but it might be worth taking a look at that again if there are questions about equity and fairness and who's paying and who's not, because regardless of whether or not any of the legacy districts are going to end up paying more or less or bringing assets or liabilities into the newly consolidated district, the reality is that there's going to be a lot of people who currently are in the legacy districts paying through their utility bills where they weren't doing that previously, and paying through the geo bond where they weren't doing that previously. And that was kind of, I think, the reason why the district was formed was there wasn't enough financial capability within the 4 legacy districts to continue to provide the operations and address the upcoming capital needs. And that's why we expanded the tax base for the geo bond and who's paying for the operations. So anytime we get into this discussion, I'm always mindful of that fact, but I think that it might be worth providing some easily digestible information on City of Portland's direct contribution to currently and after the ports, and then also break that out by city and legacy district on how people are going to see this, because I know within the legacy districts, they're going to continue to get assessments, they're going to get utility bills, and they're also going to be paying for a geo bond. And if we could have that in one place, it'd be easier to, I think, for us as a board and for the public to wrap their head around who's paying what and how much is increasing in any given geography. So that's my comment on this.
Thanks, Seth. I think we've had variations of what you're talking about, maybe just not the updated version. Okay.
We've gotten all the individual pieces. We haven't gotten it all kind of put on a one-page thing that's easy to digest. And so
Gotcha.
that's where I think that would be, not as asking for staff to generate anything new, maybe just pull together what's already been generated related to who's paying.
Thanks, Seth. Corky?
Yeah, closely related to what Seth is asking. And I know this is a tough ask, and anytime you're asking for something simple about a complicated issue, that makes it even more difficult. But I had hoped that a good year ago, we would have had a fairly simple breakdown of not just the assets and liabilities as of today that each district is bringing to the merge, but the other liabilities that are not necessarily, so clear on paper on the bank statement. So we talked about this years ago, and we thought we were moving in that direction, but it does get very complicated. The classic example is the railroad embankment in Pin 1. That's a liability. It's a big liability, and that's coming from Pin 1 into the urban district. It would be nice to have clarity on these different liabilities, not just the bank statements, but liabilities that we know are coming, assets that we know are coming into it as well, and that includes easements, for example. Some districts have lots of easements, others don't. Those that don't have lots of easements, they're bringing liability to the table here that others are going to have to pay in some fashion as we move forward. We had made clear 5 years ago, maybe, that that's what we needed to do, is do that report, have that transparency that we can show everybody. And maybe I'm mistaken, but I've never seen that. And I know this is very late in the game, but I think this is closely related to what Seth is asking for.
Eric.
Okay, Corky, this goes back to the December 2020 discussion that you and I and Claudio had at the Assets and Liabilities Committee. And we did a pretty good job then of saying, what is our future cash flow requirement by district? And Bill may still have that in the final A&L report. I don't have it right in front of me. I could run back to my files and get it. But that would give you a good sense of what those contingent liabilities would be for future cash flows and what people are taking on each side. I know that when we looked at this, we realized that we didn't want to go through the expense of trying to assign a value to an intangible asset like an easement, because it would be just an accounting game to no useful purpose. So one of the reasons that we accepted the stated financials as a basis upon which we would look at the valuation between all these firms, these entities, the districts, was going to be audited financials. I mean, that was the easiest one for everybody to understand. But again, what we're doing is we're coming up to this point of saying that SDIC is bringing a financial position that has adequate reserves for capital and for operating working capital needs. Lori's saying, and I do look forward to seeing it, okay.
So this was shared with the board, I believe, in July of 2023. I know you all get a lot of information from me, so I don't expect that you would remember this presentation. But this is one of the first times that we walked through and said, what are the values that are being brought to the table by each of the districts? This data is a little bit old, but I would say the relative values are probably pretty similar. I can run it again on last year's audited net values for each of the districts as well. I think you'll see a similar split. So MCDD, even with their debt balances, is coming to the table with a little over half of the value of the consolidated district, and each of the other individual districts with their assets minus their liabilities is coming to the table with about a total of 45%. So with Penn 2 at that point looking a little bit better, I would say it's probably shifted a little bit, and it's probably a little more even between those other three districts. So MCDD is by far the largest district. We know that. The revenues from MCDD are by far the biggest of the total. But this is a net value. So this takes the assets minus the liabilities. And this is what we're looking at for each of the districts and what they're bringing to the table. This data is a little bit old, but I would say it's probably very similar now if we were to look at it. It's probably a little bit of a shift.
And Lori, we did prepare charts that showed who's paying now and who would pay in year one by jurisdiction. Yes. And by former district. I can't remember the month we provided that information, but we will dust it off and update it and get it back out to you all. What we found when we produced that analysis before was that the city of Portland and the Port of Portland go up a tiny bit. I think Gresham went up a little bit because of the flood safety benefit fee, and everybody else was almost exactly the same. Portland went from like 87% to 87.5%. And Seth, to your request, I'm not sure those figures incorporated payments for the bond, because at that time we didn't have the amount of the bond settled. So we'd have to do a calculation on the bond contribution separately. And I think we've done that calculation too, but I can't remember when.
Thanks. I guess I'm having a hard time understanding where this is going. And Eric, I heard you say surcharge. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but it feels like a fruitless exercise. If you go through all of the analysis, and I get it, you want to know exactly what each district's bringing to the new district, what assets, what liabilities, how does that equate to fairness across the board. But let's say you determine that one of the districts isn't bringing what everyone else is, and you talked about a surcharge. In my mind, the new district doesn't necessarily have the capability of charging a surcharge to a sub area. So it would have to be up to that individual legacy district to impose a fee on itself. To me, that sounds like a pretty fruitless exercise. Like, why would MCDD vote to surcharge its own members right before consolidating into a new district? That seems ridiculous to me.
So again, what I'm going to request is that quite a bit of this work was done in 2020 and 2021. I'm sorry that you guys didn't go back and look at those reports, because I thought they were done very well, and FCS gave us some very significant insights on it. So there are ways that they had suggested that we could work it out. And it's one of the options I fully expected to see from this. And that work was not, well, I don't want to say ignored, because I don't think that Corky and my effort on that committee was really quite valuable. But I'd like to see that element brought into this. And then what I'll do is I'll refresh myself on our year-end 2023 net positions and see how that has changed since the original work that we did. So I'll take that on as my responsibility.
Thanks, Eric. Corky.
Steve, I'd just say, to what end? It's a good question. It's a very good question. To me, the answer to that is for transparency's sake. We had a lot of angst around this years ago when we first started down this path toward merging the districts. And it's still out there, and I think to ignore that would be a dangerous thing for us. And so again, I know it's a lot of work, and it would be easy to say, there's no point in it. We're merging. This will, in the end, 10 years from now, we're not going to care, right? But I do think there's something to be said for the transparency for the public at large, our ratepayers, to say, yeah, they really did there it is. A one pager shows me they really did the work to make sure that everybody is whole. So that's really the only point. It's not that we haven't done the work, but we haven't been able to communicate as well as I would like. So.
And I'll just say,
Corky, that is exactly what we concluded as part of the Assets and Liabilities Committee, that the transparency on this was really the most important element. And I'm sorry that nobody ever followed through on our original suggestion.
Thanks, Eric. I get it. The transparency makes sense to me, although
it won't in 10 years.
I also think it's more complicated than we want to make it. You mentioned easements. There are all sorts of benefits that should be attributed to the assets column that maybe are a little bit difficult to quantify, and I could see each legacy district taking a crack at that, but in the end, who really determines whether they're overvaluing or undervaluing any particular class of assets, and to what end? Again, to what end? Are we only creating angst here, or are we actually solving the problem?
Again, that's a good question, and I guess what I'm envisioning in my very simple mind is a summary of all these things where you say, we thought about trying to calculate the easements in every district, and we said that's just not worth it, and here's why. So somebody can see that and say, okay, I had that question too. I would have liked that they'd calculated it. They didn't. I get why they didn't. That sort of thing. I'm probably oversimplifying it, but that's because you're right. We don't want to be just spinning our wheels here, especially at this stage of the game.
Eric?
I guess from what I'm hearing, there was some preliminary reports or analysis or something that was pulled together by the Assets and Liabilities Committee, something that was done with Bill, our chief engineer. So if that was from 2 years ago, if we can dig that out of the file and send it out to the board so that we have it to look at. We can at least then be able to say that the board was made aware of this information. It may ultimately not change what decisions made, but it can help demonstrate that, well, you know, we were aware of these other potential options. There were pros and cons of them. We ultimately came to what we felt like was the best overall choice, but we didn't do it in the dark without that there were other things. So, you know, I'm hopeful that there's something that's already existing, that we're not, you know, creating a whole new report, since there's been references to stuff that's already been done. It may be dated, the numbers may not be exactly right, but they'll be, I think the relative positions will be sufficient to give us what we need.
Mary Helen?
I just want to agree wholeheartedly with, it needs to be simple, it needs to be transparent, and it needs to be in language that people, and I will use myself as an example, can understand. Because what information that people see on the website, not a single person except one neighbor who is an accountant for Intel could understand it. And so he did some work and helped explain to his angry neighbors who said, what are we paying for? Why aren't they paying? Those kinds of things. So I think it needs to be not only understandable to the Erics and Tannys and Seths of this world, but it also needs to be understandable to the people who are going to be relied on to support. And that's my plea, is keep it simple and be transparent and say, this is what you're paying for. I think Eric Mueller once said, well, nobody's going to be happy, or maybe it was Nancy, I don't remember, it was a good line, but nobody's going to be happy, and you can't make everybody happy all of the time, but at least be able to tell the truth. And or I'm not even say truth, because I don't think there's been any lies, but I think that it needs to be understandable to the people that we're responsible to represent. And I hear words all the time that I don't understand. And so I don't think everybody understands what neighbors think, because they don't get out there and hear people upset with, we don't know what we're paying for. What is this all about? And I live in the floodplain. I have neighbors that live a block away from me that didn't even know the levee was a levee. They thought it was a bike path and a walking path. And so I think that it needs to, the educational part of it needs to be stepped up, not only in what it is, but in a manner that it's not presented as dangerous, but in supportive of their future. And I put a quote in the chat because it just rang true with all the historic preservation work that I do. If we don't know our history, we aren't going to be able to know our future. And I think this is a really good one for this exercise. So I fully support trying to come up with something. I'd be willing to help be the test case language understander, because everybody else has a better grasp of this than I do, but I have a pretty good grasp of what can't be understood.
Thanks, Mary Helen. All right, try to bring us around. I've heard some, I wouldn't say consensus. I've heard a few folks say that they would like to see the report from the assets liabilities group from years ago, not updated, but just the report as is, if that could be dug up prior to our next board meeting. The need for some simplified materials to help board members explain kind of some of the overall financial information to the public. Do we have any other discussion about this item that would be helpful for staff before we contemplate this at the next meeting? Tanny.
I would just say I'd really like to see what the assets and liabilities group came up with. I think that would be very beneficial for all of us. And then the other thing, which I'm sure we have it, is we have a list of the assets that we're talking about.
I think that's in the assets and liabilities report, if I'm not mistaken. There might be some new stuff that's been purchased since then, and you've seen pictures of most of that in the financial documents, but I think that's all
It'd be
it.
helpful to see what it is we're talking about.
So do you want a list of the capital assets, Tanny? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, the 15 million, what are those?
Sure.
We're talking,
The 15 million that was on the slide, that was
Right.
like the third or fourth slide or whatever.
yeah.
Sure they have that.
And then the other documents you guys are looking for is who's paying now, who's paying next year, incorporating the bond payments. And then we want to review the FCS work and the December 2020 work that Claudio, Eric, and Corky did, and look at those potential options for surcharges. Correct? Are there other items that the board that I didn't capture? And the Pen 2 audit, Eric, I think we will get that posted. It may already be posted.
He took it back.
Okay.
Found it. I found the link.
Yeah, I was surprised it wasn't up there, but thank you for
That's out
checking.
It's
Okay,
there.
thank you. Any other things y'all want?
To get outside and enjoy the weather?
Can't have that.
Oh, sorry.
Peace.
Well, peace.
Go ahead, Eric.
Can I just jump in real quick? This is quick. A glossary would be helpful. I know some of the documents have glossary, and so I think for my neighbors of, very even simply, what's an asset? Because if they don't know what a levy is, or that they live a mile from the levy, we need to be able to educate them so that they know what they're paying for. It's like saying you're going to buy a car and not telling them what kind of car they're going to buy.
Mary Helen, page 96 of the budget book through page,
Okay, so I can print that out and give it to people?
yeah.
Yep.
It's a public
Okay.
document.
Eric, you were going to speak, and then Nancy, and we're going to look to wrap this up.
So I've just got a quick question. One of my neighbors claimed that when the bond issue passes, that the government-owned properties will not contribute toward that payment.
That's
That's
correct. That's in the
correct.
Oregon Constitution.
Okay, so Heron Lakes won't pay, Delta Park won't pay,
No public property
Metro
will pay.
won't pay.
No public
Got it.
property will
Okay,
pay.
just
No public
Right.
property pays for
Just
any
wanted-
capital bond. None, ever.
Nancy?
Oh, I just wanted to point out that I went to visit my friend in upstate New York last year, and we went walking on this nice little path by our house, and she's like, yeah, it's really nice. You can see the river. I don't know what it is. And I took one look at it. It's like, I think this is a levee. So and as we were walking around, there was this little sign, maintenance of, levee people here. And I was like, so I think we're not alone in having people who live right next to the levee not really understand what it is. But, more power to our education folks as we go forward.
Well, and isn't it great that we've integrated into the landscape so well, they're not even aware of it? I think that's great.
It's a statement of something, Corky. I'm not sure what.
It may be a levee, but it's still a trail.
Yeah.
It's a bike path.
Still a bike path.
They'll be mad when it breaks. We know that.
That's true, yeah.
Anybody that hasn't had a chance to pipe up and speak your mind? All right, giving everyone a chance here, but I'm also cognizant of how beautiful it is outside and that you've got lots left in your day. So unless I hear somebody pipe up really quickly, we're going to look to adjourn this meeting.
Thank you all for your time and contributions and questions, and we'll work hard to turn around some of that analysis and historic documents that you guys asked for.
Thanks, Jim. Going, gone. Adjourned.
5 minutes early, wow.
Way to go, Mr. Chair.